The marble floors of Sterling Industries' 42nd floor had never witnessed anything quite like what was about to unfold. In less than 60 seconds, a single word would shatter the composed atmosphere of the most important board meeting of the year, expose a secret that had been buried for 5 years, and change 3 lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez clutched her cleaning cart tighter as she stepped off the executive elevator, her worn sneakers squeaking against the pristine marble. At 26, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Head down, movements quick and efficient, blending into the background like wallpaper. The night shift at Sterling Industries paid better than her morning job at the diner, and with twin 4-year-olds to support, every dollar mattered. The executive floor was usually empty by 9 p.m., which was exactly why Maya preferred it. No judgmental stares at her faded uniform. No whispered comments about the single mother who smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and exhaustion. Tonight felt different, though. Light spilled from the conference room at the end of the hallway, and she could hear the low murmur of voices. Maya checked her phone. 9:47 p.m. She was already running behind schedule, and Mrs. Chen from daycare charged extra for every minute past 10:30. The conference room would have to wait until the meeting ended. She started with the smaller offices, methodically emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces. Her mind wandered to the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table and the worried phone call from Jake and Tommy's preschool teacher about their upcoming field trip fee. $25 might as well have been 25,000. The voices from the conference room grew louder, more animated. Maya tried to ignore them, but one voice cut through the others, like a knife through silk, deep, authoritative, achingly familiar. Her hands stilled on the desk she was cleaning, and for a moment she was transported back 5 years to a different life, a different version of herself. Before the betrayal, before the lies, before she discovered that the man she loved, the father of her children, was already married to someone else. Maya shook her head violently, forcing the memories back into their carefully constructed box. She had work to finish. By 10:15, the conference room had finally fallen silent. Maya waited another 10 minutes to be safe, then gathered her supplies and pushed her cart toward the imposing double doors. The room was a testament to corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a mahogany table that could seat 20, and leather chairs that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. But it was the mess that made her stomach drop. Coffee cups scattered across the table, crumpled papers on the floor, and what looked like the remnants of a catered dinner abandoned on the sideboard. This would take at least 40 minutes, and she was already cutting it close. Maya plugged in her earbuds and started with the table, methodically clearing away the detritus of corporate decision-making. She was reaching for a particularly stubborn coffee ring when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Panic shot through her chest. No one was supposed to be here this late. Maya quickly unplugged her earbuds and moved toward the supply closet, hoping to make herself scarce until whoever it was passed by. The footsteps stopped directly outside the conference room. "I thought I told security to clear this floor," a voice said, and Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew that voice. She had once whispered secrets to it in the dark, had heard it promise her forever, had listened to it lie with devastating precision. The door opened, and Maya found herself face to face with Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, heir to a fortune that could buy small countries, and the father of her twin sons. He looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. The same piercing blue eyes that Jake had inherited, the same strong jawline that Tommy touched whenever he missed his daddy, the same perfectly styled dark hair that had once been mussed by Maya's fingers. But there was something harder about him now, more polished and distant, as if the last 5 years had transformed him into a different species entirely. "What are you doing here?" Alexander's voice was carefully controlled, but Maya caught the tremor underneath. "I work here," Maya managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Night cleaning crew." Alexander's eyes swept over her uniform, her cleaning cart, the evidence of her reduced circumstances, and she watched something flicker across his face. Surprise, guilt, something that might have been pain. Maya. Her name sounded strange in his mouth after so many years of silence. "Mr. Sterling," she corrected, lifting her chin with whatever dignity she could muster. They stood there in the fluorescent-lit conference room, 5 years of hurt and anger and unanswered questions stretching between them like a chasm. Maya's hands were shaking, so she gripped her cleaning cloth tighter. "You work here," Alexander repeated, as if he couldn't quite process the information. "How long?" 6 months. Maya's voice was stronger now, fueled by the familiar burn of old resentment. "Don't worry, I stay out of your way. Different shifts, different floors. I'm very good at being invisible." Alexander flinched. "Maya, I don't." The word came out sharper than Maya intended. "Just don't. I have work to finish, and you have a company to run. Let's keep it that way." She turned back to the table, determined to finish her job and get out of there before she said something she couldn't take back. But Alexander didn't leave. Instead, she heard him close the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the vast room like a gunshot. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't," Maya continued, wiping down the table with mechanical precision. "We needed to talk 5 years ago. That ship has sailed, crashed, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. You disappeared," Alexander said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "One day you were there, and the next day you were gone. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing." Maya's hand stilled. Slowly, she turned to face him, and the hurt she had worked so hard to bury came rushing back like a flood. "I disappeared?" Her voice rose an octave. "I found out you were married, Alexander. Married, with a wife who was conveniently traveling in Europe while you were playing house with me. It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Maya slammed the cleaning cloth down on the table. "I was pregnant, scared, and completely in love with a man who turned out to be a complete fiction. So yes, I disappeared. I disappeared before you could destroy what little self-respect I had left." Alexander ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up in a way that made Maya's chest ache with unwanted familiarity. "Victoria and I were separated," he said quietly. "We had been for months. The marriage was arranged by our families, a business merger disguised as love. I was trying to find a way out that wouldn't destroy both companies. And you decided to handle that by lying to me for 8 months? I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself," Maya shot back, "and your precious reputation, and your family's business interests. Don't you dare stand there and pretend it was about me." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander looked older suddenly, the confident CEO mask slipping to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. "You were pregnant," he said finally, and Maya's heart stopped. "Were," she repeated carefully. "Were," Alexander echoed, and she could see him doing the math, counting backward, hope and fear warring in his expression. Maya picked up her cleaning cloth again, needing something to do with her hands. "I should finish this. Mrs. Chen charges extra after 10:30. "Maya." Alexander's voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Were you pregnant with my child?" The question hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and impossible to ignore. Maya had imagined this moment 1,000 times. What she would say, how she would feel, whether she would tell him the truth or let him wonder forever. She had never imagined it would happen in a corporate conference room at nearly 11 p.m. while she was holding a dirty cleaning cloth and wearing a uniform that smelled like disinfectant. "That's not your concern anymore," she said finally. The hell? It isn't. Alexander took a step closer, and Maya could smell his cologne, the same one he had worn 5 years ago, the one that used to make her feel safe and loved and cherished. Now it just made her feel nauseated. "You made your choice," Maya said, backing toward her cleaning cart. "You chose your wife, your company, your perfect life. I made mine. End of story." "Maya, please." The word that came out of her mouth next would later be blamed on exhaustion, on stress, on the surreal nature of the entire situation. But in the moment, it felt as natural as breathing, a slip back into old patterns and forgotten. "Intimacy. Please, what, Daddy?" The word echoed in the conference room like a bomb going off. Maya clapped a hand over her mouth, horror washing over her in waves. Alexander's eyes went wide, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and something. That might have been hope. And that's when the conference room doors burst open and 2 small voices called out in perfect unison. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mommy, we've been looking everywhere for you." Jake and Tommy Rodriguez burst through the conference room doors like tiny hurricanes, their matching Superman backpacks bouncing as they ran toward their mother. At 4 years old, they were carbon copies of each other, wild, dark hair, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and gap-toothed grins that could melt the hardest heart. "Mrs. Chen said you were working late again," Jake announced, wrapping his arms around Maya's legs. "We wanted to surprise you." "She gave us cookies," Tommy added, holding up a crumpled bag. "The chocolate chip ones with the sprinkles." Maya's mind reeled as she tried to process what was happening. Her sons were here in the executive conference room of Sterling Industries, standing 3 feet away from their father, who had no idea they existed. The word "Daddy" still hung in the air like smoke, and Alexander Sterling stood frozen beside the mahogany table, his face pale as marble. "Boys," Maya managed, her voice barely steady. "You're supposed to be with Mrs. Chen until I pick you up." "She had to leave early," Jake explained matter-of-factly. "Her daughter is having a baby. She said we were big enough to find you ourselves." "We took the elevator," Tommy said proudly. "I pressed all the buttons, but Jake said that was wrong, so we only pressed the one with the star." Maya's legs felt weak. Mrs. Chen had left her 4-year-old sons alone in a downtown office building at nearly 11 p.m. The woman who charged extra for every minute past pickup time had abandoned her children because of a family emergency. "We're not in trouble, are we, Mommy?" Jake's voice was small now, picking up on the tension in the room. "No, sweetheart," Maya whispered, pulling both boys closer. "You're not in trouble." But she was. They all were. Alexander hadn't moved or spoken since the boys appeared. He stood transfixed, his eyes moving from Jake to Tommy and back again, cataloguing every detail. Maya watched him take in their identical faces, their blue eyes, his eyes, their confident postures and animated expressions. She could see the exact moment the truth hit him. His face went from confusion to shock to something that looked like wonder, and his hands gripped the edge of the conference table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Mommy, who's that man?" Tommy asked, noticing Alexander for the first time. "Why is he staring at us?" Maya's mouth opened, but no words came out. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you introduce your children to the father who never knew they existed? Maya started, then stopped. "Boys, this is Mr. Sterling. He owns the building where Mommy works." Alexander's sharp intake of breath was audible. Maya shot him a warning look, silently begging him not to complicate an already impossible situation. "Are you rich?" Jake asked with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "Mommy says rich people own buildings." Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed Alexander's face. "I suppose I am." "Cool," Tommy said, immediately losing interest and turning back to his cookie bag. "Mommy, can we have dinner now? I'm hungry." We already had dinner, Jake corrected his brother. Remember, Mrs. Chen made us mac and cheese. That wasn't dinner. That was a snack, Tommy argued. My tummy is still making a growling noise. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. Her sons were hungry because she couldn't afford to feed them properly, standing in a conference room that probably cost more than her annual salary, while their millionaire father watched the evidence of his poverty-stricken children with growing horror. We'll stop by the diner on the way home, she said quietly. Jerry usually has leftover pie. Can we have ice cream too? Jake asked hopefully. We'll see, Maya replied, the standard parental response that meant probably not, but I can't bear to disappoint you right now. Alexander stepped forward suddenly, his movement sharp enough to make Maya flinch. There's a cafe on the 3rd floor, he said, his voice carefully controlled. It's closed, but I have the keys. They keep sandwich supplies and... He swallowed hard. Ice cream. Both boys perked up immediately. Real ice cream, Tommy asked. Not the frozen yogurt that tastes like sadness? Maya couldn't help but smile. Despite the situation. Where did you learn that phrase? Uncle Danny, Jake said. He says lots of things taste like sadness, especially vegetables. Alexander was staring again, and Maya could practically see the questions multiplying in his mind. Uncle Danny. How many people were in their lives that he knew nothing about? How many milestones had he missed? How many bedtime stories, scraped knees, first words, first steps? We should go, Maya said, reaching for her cleaning cart. It's past their bedtime. Please, Alexander said, and the word came out rougher than he intended. Let me get them something to eat. Properly. Tommy tugged on Maya's uniform. I like him, Mummy. He has a nice voice. Jake nodded in agreement. And he's really tall, like a giant but a friendly one. Maya closed her eyes. Her children were charming their father without knowing it, and Alexander was looking at them like they were miracles he never expected to witness. 5 minutes, she said finally, but then we're leaving. Alexander's relief was palpable. The cafe, 3rd floor. I'll show you the way. The elevator ride down was surreal. Jake and Tommy chatted excitedly about the building, the fancy elevator, and the mysterious rich man who was taking them for ice cream. Alexander stood in the corner, watching them with an intensity that made Maya's chest tight. Do you have kids, Mr. Sterling? Tommy asked with characteristic directness. Alexander's eyes met Maya's in the elevator's polished surface. No, I don't. That's sad, Jake said sympathetically. Kids are the best, except when Tommy eats my cereal. But Mommy says sharing is caring. I don't eat your cereal, Tommy protested. I eat the good parts, the marshmallows. Those are the good parts. Boys, Maya warned. But Alexander laughed, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. They're incredible, he murmured so quietly that only Maya could hear. The cafe was a study in corporate sterility, chrome and glass surfaces, motivational posters about synergy and excellence, and a cold case filled with expensive-looking sandwiches and salads. But Alexander moved through it with purpose, pulling containers from the freezer and setting them on the counter. We have chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and he paused, reading a label. Birthday cake flavor? Birthday cake, both boys shouted in unison. It's not anyone's birthday, Maya protested weakly. Every day someone has a birthday, Jake said. Philosophically, Mrs. Chen told us that, so every day is a birthday somewhere. Alexander was already scooping generous portions into bowls, his movements careful and deliberate. Maya noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. Do you want some, Mummy? Tommy asked, climbing onto one of the high stools at the counter. I'm okay, baby. Mommy doesn't eat ice cream, Jake explained to Alexander. She says it's too expensive. The spoon in Alexander's hand stilled. Maya felt heat flood her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with anger. She didn't need her financial struggles announced to the man who could buy the entire ice cream company without checking his bank balance. Ice cream is important, Alexander said carefully, resuming his scooping. Everyone should have ice cream. He set the bowls in front of the boys, then looked at Maya. Without saying anything, he prepared a fourth bowl and slid it across the counter to her. I said I didn't want any, Maya muttered. Birthday cake flavor, Alexander said simply. Jake's. Right, someone, somewhere, is having a birthday. Maya stared at the bowl. When was the last time someone had given her something without expecting anything in return? When had someone last noticed that she always said no to treats because she couldn't afford them? Tommy was already demolishing his ice cream, getting more on his face than in his mouth. Jake was more methodical, savoring each bite while swinging his legs from the tall stool. This is the best ice cream ever, Tommy declared, his face covered in pink and blue frosting bits. Better than the truck? Jake asked skeptically. Way better. Mr. Sterling, do you eat ice cream every day? Alexander considered the question seriously. No, I don't think I've had ice cream in years. That's terrible, Jake said with deep concern. No wonder you don't have kids. You can't have kids without ice cream. It's like a rule. Is it? Alexander's lips twitched. Oh, yeah. Tommy nodded sagely. Mommy told us that ice cream makes families happy. Right, Mommy? Maya nearly choked on her first spoonful. She had said that months ago when they'd walked past an ice cream shop and the boys had pressed their faces against the window longingly. She'd been trying to explain why they couldn't go in, spinning a story about ice cream being a special family treat that they'd save for when they had extra money. I said ice cream was for special occasions. Maya corrected gently. This is special, Jake announced. We met a giant who gives us ice cream and has a really big building. That's definitely special. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, watching the boys eat with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. What do you two want to be when you grow up? He asked finally. A superhero, Tommy said immediately. Like Superman, but with better hair. A scientist, Jake said thoughtfully. I want to make robots that help people clean up messes. That's very admirable, Alexander said, and Maya could hear genuine respect in his voice. What do you do, Mr. Sterling? Jake asked. Besides your own buildings? I run a company that makes technology. We create things that help other companies work better. Like robots? Sort of, computer programs mostly. Tommy looked disappointed. That sounds boring. Tommy, Maya scolded, but Alexander was laughing again. It can be boring, he admitted, but sometimes we make things that help doctors save people, or help teachers teach better, or help families stay connected when they're far apart. That's not boring, Jake decided. That's important. Thank you, Alexander said solemnly, as if Jake's approval meant everything. Maya watched this exchange with growing unease. Her sons were falling under Alexander's spell, charmed by his attention and kindness, but this was temporary. In a few minutes they would leave, and Alexander would go back to his penthouse and his perfect life, and her boys would ask questions she couldn't answer. We should go, she said, standing abruptly. It's almost midnight. But we're not finished, Tommy protested, holding up his half-empty bowl. You can finish it quickly, Maya said, her voice firmer than she felt. Alexander caught her eye. Maya, we need to... No, she said quietly but firmly. We don't need to do anything. Thank you for the ice cream. Boys, say thank you to Mr. Sterling. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, they chorused dutifully. Can we come back tomorrow? Jake asked hopefully. Maybe you could show us your robot computers. Alexander's face lit up. I would love that. We won't be back, Maya said quickly. Different cleaning schedule tomorrow. The disappointment on Alexander's face was almost painful to witness, but Maya steeled herself against it. She had protected her sons for 4 years. She wouldn't stop now, especially not for a man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. With their hearts, as they waited for the elevator, Tommy tugged on Alexander's expensive suit jacket. Mr. Sterling? Yes? You should eat more ice cream, and maybe get some kids. They make everything better. Alexander crouched down to Tommy's level, his face serious. "You think so?" "I know so," Tommy said with absolute certainty. "Right, Jake?" "Right," Jake agreed. "Kids are the best thing ever, even when they're annoying." "I'm not annoying," Tommy protested. "You ate my cereal this morning. That was sharing." As the elevator doors opened and Maya ushered her sons inside, she caught Alexander's, "I won last time." He looked lost, standing in the empty cafe with 4 ice cream bowls on the counter, watching his children disappear from his life as suddenly as they had entered it. The doors closed, and Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. Maya didn't sleep, and that night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills while Jake and Tommy slept soundly in their shared bedroom. The tiny apartment felt even smaller after the gleaming expanse of Sterling Industries, and the silence pressed against her eardrums like a physical weight. Her phone buzzed at 3:47 a.m., an unknown number. "We need to talk." Alexander Maya stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without responding. She didn't owe him anything, not explanations, not conversations, not access to the children he'd never bothered to look for, but even as she tried to convince herself of this, guilt gnawed at her chest. The boys had been so happy tonight, so animated and excited. When was the last time she'd seen them light up like that? When had she last been able to give them ice cream without calculating the cost against their grocery budget? Her phone buzzed. "Again at 4:15 a.m. I hired a private investigator 4 years ago. He couldn't find you." Maya's blood ran cold. Alexander had been looking for her. The carefully constructed story she'd told herself, that he'd forgotten about her the moment she left, that he'd moved on without a second thought, crumbled like sand. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "I didn't want to be found." The reply came immediately, as if he'd been waiting by his phone. "Jake and Tommy are my sons." It wasn't a question. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. "Yes, why didn't you tell me?" Maya laughed bitterly at her phone. Even through text messages, Alexander Sterling managed to sound entitled. "Because you lied to me for 8 months. Because you had a wife. Because I was 21 and terrified, and you were going to choose your company over me anyway." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times. "Finally, I got divorced." Maya blinked. "What?" "6 months after you left, I divorced Victoria. The company survived. Barely, but it survived." She stared at the message until the words blurred. Alexander had left his wife. He'd risked everything, his family's business empire, his carefully planned future, his reputation. 6 months too late. "Good for you. Maya, please. I need to see them again." "No, they're my children too." The phone rang before Maya could type. A response. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her chest cracked open, and she found herself answering. "You don't get to do this," she whispered into the phone. "You don't get to show up after 4 years and demand rights to children you never knew existed." "I would have known if you'd told me." Alexander's voice was rough, exhausted. "I would have been there, Maya, for all of it. Would you, really? Because when I left you were still married. You were still choosing your perfect life over me. I was trying to protect you." "Stop saying that," Maya's voice cracked. "You were protecting yourself. You were protecting your image and your family's business and your precious reputation. I was just collateral damage." Alexander was quiet for so long that Maya thought he'd hung up. Finally, "You're right." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "You're right. I was a coward. I was scared of losing everything, so I tried to hold on to both lives, and I ended up losing the only thing that mattered." Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Alexander, they're incredible, Maya. Jake and Tommy. They're smart and funny and kind, and they're everything I never knew I wanted. They're everything I never knew I could have," Maya whispered. "They saved me, Alexander." When I had nothing left, when I was broken and alone and scared, they gave me purpose. I should have been there for that. But you weren't. And now they have a life, and I have a life, and we don't need you to swoop in and... They're eating ice cream like it's a miracle. Alexander interrupted quietly. Jake wants to build robots to help people. Tommy thinks I'm a friendly giant. They're hungry, Maya. They're hungry, and you're working 2 jobs, and you're killing yourself trying to give them everything they need. We're fine, Maya said through gritted teeth. No, you're not, and you don't have to be. Let me help. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. What did Maya want? She wanted to go back 5 years and make different choices. She wanted to have never fallen in love with Alexander Sterling in the first place. She wanted to be able to buy her son's ice cream without checking her bank account. She wanted to stop being so tired all the time. I want you to leave us alone, she said finally. I can't do that. You have to. Maya, I missed 4 years of their lives, 4 years of birthdays and first words and bedtime stories and scraped knees. I missed everything and I can't get that back. But I can be here now. For how long? Maya's voice was bitter. Until you get bored? Until the novelty wears off? Until you meet someone who fits better into your world? Forever, Alexander said simply. I want to be their father forever. Maya closed her eyes. You can't just decide that, Alexander. You can't just waltz back into our lives and declare yourself their father because you feel guilty. Then let me prove it. How? I don't know yet. But give me a chance to figure it out. Maya looked toward the boy's bedroom, where she could hear Tommy talking in his sleep. He did that sometimes, carrying on full conversations with dream people about dinosaurs and superheroes and weather. Cookies counted as breakfast food. They don't know who you are, she said quietly. I know. If you hurt them, if you disappoint them, if you make them love you and then leave, I won't. How can you promise that? How can you possibly promise that? Alexander was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable, because I love them already. I sat with them for 30 minutes, and I love them more than I've ever loved anything, because when Jake said kids make everything better, something in my chest cracked open, and I realized I've been living half a life for the past 4 years. Maya's breath caught. Alexander, because when Tommy said I should get some kids, I wanted to tell him I already had the best kids in the world, and they were sitting right there eating ice cream and being perfect. Tears were streaming down Maya's face now. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it's not fair. Because I've been doing this alone for 4 years, and now you want to come in and be the hero, and I'm so tired, Alexander. I'm so tired of being strong all the time. Then let me help carry some of it. Maya sobbed into the phone, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling at once. She'd been holding everything together for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to share the weight. I can't afford their field trip, she whispered. $25, and I can't afford it. They're going to the Science Museum next week, and all their friends are going, and I can't send them because I have to choose between the field trip and groceries. Maya, I buy their clothes at thrift stores and I cut their hair myself. And half the time dinner is whatever I can get for free from the diner. I'm failing them, Alexander. I'm failing them every single day. You're not failing them. You're keeping them alive and loved and happy. You're doing everything right. It's not enough. Then let me help make it enough. Maya wiped her eyes with a dish towel. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in. I don't know how to trust that you won't leave again. I don't know how to be a father, Alexander admitted. I don't know how to be the person they deserve. But I want to learn. I want to try. What if we mess this up? Then we'll figure it out together. Maya looked around her tiny kitchen, at the second-hand furniture, the outdated appliances, the stack of bills that never seemed to get smaller. Then she thought about Jake and Tommy, asleep in their shared bedroom, dreaming of robots and superheroes and friendly giants who gave them ice cream. "We need rules," she said finally. "Okay. You don't get to buy your way into their lives. No expensive gifts, no fancy trips, no trying to be the fun parent while I'm the one who has to say no to everything. Agreed. You don't get to tell them who you are until I'm ready, until I'm sure you're going to stay." "How long?" "I don't know. As long as it takes." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "What do I tell them when they ask to see me again?" "I don't." "No," Maya admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." "Yeah," Maya said, and for the first time in 4 years, the word didn't sound impossible. Together. After they hung up, Maya sat in her kitchen as the sun began to rise over the city. She could hear Jake and Tommy starting to stir, their internal clocks attuned to Saturday morning cartoons and pancakes. She thought about Alexander, probably sitting in his penthouse with the same view of the sunrise, wondering how to be a father to children who thought he was just a nice man with really good ice cream. It was terrifying and complicated and probably a terrible idea. But for the first time in 4 years, Maya felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. "Mommy?" Tommy appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up in 12 different directions. "Can we have pancakes?" "Of course, baby," Maya said, pulling him into her lap. "We can have whatever you want." "Can we have ice cream pancakes? Like the ice cream from last night?" Maya smiled despite everything. "I think we can manage that." "Is the giant man going to come eat pancakes with us?" Maya's heart clenched. "What giant man?" "Mr. Sterling. He was nice. I liked him." "He was nice," Maya agreed carefully, "but he's probably busy today." "Oh," Tommy said, clearly disappointed. "Well, maybe next time." "Maybe," Maya said, and for the first time she meant it. Monday morning brought chaos to the Sterling Industries. A boardroom. Alexander sat at the head of the mahogany table, staring at quarterly reports without seeing them, while his senior executives discussed market projections and budget allocations. His mind was elsewhere, replaying Saturday morning pancakes that he hadn't been invited to, imagining bedtime stories he'd never read, wondering what Jake and Tommy were doing at this exact moment. "Sterling?" Alexander snapped back to attention. Margaret Chen, his chief financial officer, was looking at him expectantly, not to be confused with Mrs. Chen, who watched the boys. This Margaret Chen was sharp-edged and brilliant, with silver hair and no patience for distraction. "I'm sorry. What was the question?" "The Henderson acquisition. Do we move forward with the offer?" Alexander glanced at the projected numbers on the screen. Henderson Technologies, a small startup that had developed an innovative communication platform. 6 months ago, he would have approved the acquisition without hesitation. Now, looking at the price tag, all he could think about was how many field trips that money could fund. "What's their employee count?" he asked. Margaret frowned. 43 full-time employees. Why does that matter?" "Families? I'm sorry. How many of those employees have families? Children?" The room fell silent. Alexander's board of directors exchanged glances that ranged from confused to concerned. Their CEO was asking about employee family structures during an acquisition discussion, which was decidedly not normal behavior. "I'm not sure that's relevant to the financial projections," Margaret said carefully. "Everything is relevant," Alexander said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "If we acquire Henderson, what happens to their current benefits package? Do they maintain their health insurance, child care assistance?" "We typically restructure benefits to match our existing framework," said David Kumar, VP of Human Resources. "Which is?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Competitive but cost-effective. We don't currently offer childcare assistance." "Why not?" "Because it's expensive Alexander leaned back in his chair. When had he become the kind of CEO who saw employees as line items instead of people with real lives and real struggles? When had he stopped caring about the human cost of his business decisions? "Table the Henderson acquisition," he said suddenly. "Sir, table it. I want a full review of our benefits package first. And I want to know about every employee in our current organization who has children under 18. Margaret's pen paused over her notepad. "That's going to take considerable time and resources. Then we'll invest the time and resources." "May I ask why?" Alexander thought about Jake wanting to build robots to help people, about Tommy declaring that kids make everything better, about Maya working 2 jobs and still unable to afford a $25 field trip. "Because we're not just running a company," he said finally. "We're providing livelihoods for real families. And if we're not taking care of our people, then what's the point of any of this?" The meeting continued, but Alexander's attention drifted again. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, Maya was probably at her morning job at the diner, serving coffee to customers who didn't know she had a master's degree in early childhood education that she'd never been able to use because childcare was too expensive. His phone buzzed with a text. For a wild moment, he hoped it was Maya, but it was his assistant, Caroline. "Your 2 p.m. cancelled. You have a free hour." Alexander stared at the message, then typed back, "Clear my schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Sir, you have the quarterly. Review with the board at 3, reschedule it. And the conference call with Tokyo at 4:30, move it to tomorrow." Alexander pocketed his phone and stood up abruptly, interrupting David's presentation about market penetration strategies. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "I have somewhere else I need to be." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "We still have 3 agenda items to cover. Handle them without me. You're all perfectly capable." As Alexander strode toward the door, he caught his reflection in the conference room's glass wall. He looked exactly like the man he'd been 5 years ago. Perfectly tailored suit, expensive watch, every hair in place. But something fundamental had shifted. The reflection looked like a costume now, like he was playing a role instead of living a life. 20 minutes later, Alexander stood outside Sunnyside Diner, watching Maya through the window. She moved with practiced efficiency between tables, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd pulled her dark hair back in a ponytail, and she wore the same red uniform as the other waitresses, but something about her posture, straight-backed and determined, made her stand out. Alexander had eaten at restaurants that charged more for a single appetizer than Maya probably made in tips all day. The irony wasn't lost on him. He pushed through the door, and a little bell chimed overhead. The diner was a study in retro Americana, red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and a jukebox that was probably older than Maya. It smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something indefinitely comforting. Maya looked up from wiping down a table and froze when she saw him. A dozen emotions flashed across her face: surprise, panic, anger, and something that might have been relief. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, glancing nervously at her co-workers. "I wanted to see where you work," Alexander said simply. "In your $1,000 suit." Alexander looked down at himself. "It's actually $1,500. "That's not better, Alexander." An older man with graying hair and kind eyes approached them. His name tag read, "Jerry Manager." "Everything okay here, Maya?" "Fine," Maya said quickly. "Just an old friend." Jerry looked Alexander up and down, taking in the expensive clothes and the obvious tension between them. "Well, any friend of Maya's is welcome here. You want a table, or are you just visiting?" "A table would be great," Alexander said. Jerry led him to a booth in Maya's section, handed him a laminated menu, and walked away with one last protective glance at Maya Alexander slid into the booth and immediately understood why this place was special. Despite the worn edges and outdated decor, there was something warm and genuine about it. The other customers looked relaxed, comfortable. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a community gathering place. Maya approached his table with obvious reluctance, pulling out a small notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked in her professional waitress voice. "Coffee, please, and whatever you recommend. The meatloaf is good, so is the apple pie. Both then." Maya scribbled on her notepad without looking at him. "Coming right up." She started to walk away, but Alexander reached out and gently caught her wrist. The contact sent electricity up his arm, and he saw Maya's breath catch. "How long is your shift?" he asked quietly. "Until 6. Can we talk after?" Maya glanced around the diner, hyper-aware of curious glances from other customers and staff. "Not here. Not like this." "Where?" "There's a park 3 blocks north. Riverside Park. 6:30. She pulled her wrist free and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and a menu full of comfort food that suddenly seemed more appealing than any 5-star restaurant he'd ever visited. The meatloaf, when it arrived, was everything Maya had promised. Home-style cooking that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it with love. Alexander found himself eating slowly, savoring each bite and watching Maya work. She was good at her job, remembering orders without writing them down, checking on customers at just the right intervals, handling difficult patrons with grace and humor. But Alexander could see the exhaustion in the way she moved, the slight slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. A young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings slid into the booth across from him. "You're him, aren't you?" she said without preamble. "I'm sorry. Maya's ex, the one who broke her heart and left her pregnant." Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. "Save it," the woman said. "I'm Danny, Maya's friend and co-worker, and—" "Before you ask, yes, I'm the Uncle Danny your kids talk about." Alexander studied Danny's face, trying to reconcile this fierce young woman with the uncle figure Jake and Tommy had mentioned. "They call you Uncle Danny?" "Long story. Point is, I was here when Maya showed up 4 years ago, scared and alone, and barely able to afford a cup of coffee. I was here when she worked double shifts while pregnant because she couldn't afford to miss a day. I was here when she gave birth to your sons and came back to work 2 weeks later because she didn't have maternity leave." Each word hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Danny, I was here," Danny continued, "when she cried in the break room because she couldn't afford to buy them winter coats, when she sold her jewelry to pay for formula, when she worked Christmas Day because holiday pay meant she could afford presents." "Stop," Alexander said quietly. "Why? Too uncomfortable, too real." Danny leaned forward. "Those kids are the best thing that ever happened to Maya, but raising them alone nearly broke her. So whatever game you're playing, whatever guilt trip brought you here, you better be serious, because if you hurt her again, if you hurt those boys, you'll have to deal with me." With that, Danny slid out of the booth and walked away, leaving Alexander alone with his guilt and a half-eaten piece of apple pie that now tasted like ash. He paid his bill, left a tip that was probably more than Maya made in a week, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. But he didn't go back to his office. Instead, he drove to Riverside Park and sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching families play with their children and wondering how he'd become the kind of man who needed to be threatened by a purple-haired waitress to understand the impact of his own actions. At 6:30 exactly, Maya appeared. She'd changed out of her uniform into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. "Danny talked to you," she said, sitting down beside him, "but leaving careful space between them. She cares about you." "She saved my life," Maya said simply. When I had nowhere else to go, Jerry and Danny gave me a job and a family. They helped me raise the boys when I didn't know how to do it alone. Alexander stared out at the water. I should have been there, but you weren't. I know, and I can't change that. But I want to do better now. Maya pulled her knees up to her chest. How? I don't know yet, but I cleared my schedule today just to come see you. I've never done that before, cancelled meetings to have lunch at a diner. What did you think of it? Best meatloaf I've ever had. And I met Uncle Danny. Despite everything, Maya smiled. Danny's protective, I noticed. She threatened to kill me if I hurt you again. She would too. Danny grew up on the streets. She knows how to fight. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a young father push his daughter on a swing set. The little girl shrieked with laughter every time she went higher, and her father's face was lit up with pure joy. That could be us, Alexander said quietly. Me pushing Jake and Tommy on swings. You are reading on a blanket nearby. Normal family things. We're not a normal family, Alexander. We could be. Maya turned to look at him. Could we? Really? Because I work 2 jobs and live in a 1-bedroom apartment and shop at thrift stores. You live in a penthouse and run a multi-million-dollar company and probably have a wine collection worth more than my annual salary. None of that matters. It all matters. Money always matters, especially when you don't have it. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. What if I quit? What? What if I walked away from Sterling Industries, sold my shares, took the money, and we could start over somewhere else, somewhere normal? Maya stared at him. You can't be serious. Why not? The company practically runs itself now. I could teach high school math or coach Little League or... Alexander gestured helplessly. I don't know what normal people do, but I could learn. You'd be miserable, would I? Because sitting in boardrooms talking about market penetration makes me want to put my head through a wall. Watching Jake eat ice cream like it was magic. That was the most alive I've felt in years. Maya studied his face. You really mean this? I think I do. Alexander, you can't just abandon your entire life because you feel guilty about missing theirs. It's not guilt, Alexander said fiercely. It's love. I love them, Maya. I love them and I love you, and I want to build something real with all of you. You love me? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was married to Victoria, even when I thought you were gone forever, I never stopped. Maya closed her eyes. That's not fair. None of this is fair. But it's true. When Maya opened her eyes, they were bright with unshed tears. I need time. How much time? I don't know. But if you're serious about this, if you really want to be part of our lives, then you'll wait. Alexander reached over and took her hand. I'll wait forever if I have to. Don't say things like that. Why? Because I might start believing them. As the sun set over the park, Alexander realized that this conversation, sitting on a bench beside a woman who challenged him, who saw through his masks and called out his failures, felt more real than any corporate negotiation he'd ever conducted. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling wasn't thinking about profit margins, or market share, or quarterly projections. He was thinking about bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes and the possibility of a future he'd never dared to imagine. 6 months later, Maya stood in the doorway of what used to be Alexander's executive office, watching him pack the last of his personal belongings into cardboard boxes. The mahogany desk was bare, the expensive artwork had been removed from the walls, and the commanding view of the city skyline would soon belong to Margaret Chen, who had been unanimously voted in as the new CEO. Any regrets? Maya asked, stepping into the room that had once been a symbol of everything Alexander had worked to achieve. Alexander looked up from wrapping a framed photo, the first picture ever taken of all 4 of them together, snapped by Danny at the diner's annual staff barbecue. Jake and Tommy were covered in barbecue sauce and grinning wildly. Maya was laughing at something Jerry had said, and Alexander looked happier than he'd ever looked in any corporate headshot. About leaving all this? Alexander gestured around the empty office. Not even a little bit. What about the money, the power, the respect? Maya, 3 days ago, Tommy told me I was his best friend in the whole world because I helped him build a blanket fort. Yesterday, Jake said I give the best piggyback rides of anyone he knows. This morning, you kissed me goodbye like you meant it. Alexander smiled. I've never felt more powerful in my life. Maya's chest warmed. The past 6 months had been a careful dance of rebuilding trust, learning to be a family and figuring out how to blend their very different worlds. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments about money, about discipline, about how much of Alexander's wealth they could accept without losing themselves. But slowly, carefully, they built something new, something that belonged to all of them. The boys are excited about the new house, Maya said, settling into one of the leather chairs that would soon be Margaret's problem. Are you? Maya considered the question. The house Alexander had bought was nothing like his old penthouse, a modest 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district with a fenced backyard perfect for swing sets and a kitchen large enough for family dinners. It was still nicer than anything Maya could have afforded on her own, but it felt like a home rather than a monument to success. I'm terrified, she admitted, but good terrified, like standing at the top of a roller coaster. I know the feeling. Alexander's former assistant, Maya corrected herself, knocked on the open door. Mr. Sterling, the moving truck is here. Thanks, Caroline. Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes. Caroline nodded and disappeared. Alexander had helped her find a position with Henderson Technologies, which Sterling Industries had ultimately acquired under Margaret's leadership. Caroline had been thrilled about the opportunity to work for a smaller, more innovative company. Are you sure about the teaching job? Maya asked as Alexander sealed the last box. Riverside Middle School, 7th grade math. Alexander grinned. Coach of the robotics team. Summers off to spend with my family. It's perfect. The pay cut is significant. Maya, I made more money in bonuses last year than most people see in a lifetime. We'll be fine. More than fine. Maya knew he was right. Even after liquidating most of his assets and establishing college funds for Jake and Tommy, Alexander still had enough money to ensure they'd never worry about field trip fees or grocery budgets again. But more importantly, he seemed genuinely excited about his new career. Plus, Alexander added, hefting a box, Jake wants to be a robotics engineer now, instead of just building robots to clean up messes. I figure I should learn something about it if I'm going to help with homework. And Tommy wants to be a teacher. Like his daddy. His daddy, Alexander repeated softly, like he still couldn't quite believe it was real. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Jake and Tommy were officially Jake and Tommy Sterling Rodriguez, and Alexander was legally their father. Maya had kept her own name, but she wore a simple diamond ring on her left hand. Not an engagement ring exactly, but a promise ring, a symbol that they were building towards something permanent. We should go, Maya said, standing up. The boys are probably driving Jerry crazy at the diner. They decided to have an early dinner at Sunnyside before heading to the new house. Jerry had insisted on cooking their last meal as customers since Maya had given her notice the week before. She was starting a new job on Monday, assistant director at a daycare center that specializes in early childhood education. It was work she'd dreamed of doing since college, and Alexander's financial stability had finally made it possible. As they walked toward the elevator, Alexander carrying his final box of belongings, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that night 6 months ago when she'd accidentally called him Daddy in this very building. The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside. Maya pressed the button for the ground floor, and as they descended, Alexander reached for her hand. "Maya?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me try, for giving me a chance to be the father they deserve, for teaching me that there's more to life than quarterly projections and board meetings." Maya squeezed his hand. "Thank you for showing up, for staying, for proving that people can change." The elevator doors opened, and they walked through the marble lobby that had once intimidated Maya with its corporate grandeur. Now it just looked like a building. Impressive, certainly, but not more important than the family waiting for them at a retro diner 3 miles away. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted everything golden. Alexander loaded his box into the back of his new SUV. Practical, family-friendly, with built-in car seats and enough room for soccer equipment and school projects. "Race you to the diner?" he asked, dangling his keys. "You're on!" Maya laughed, heading toward her own car. 20 minutes later, they burst through the door of Sunnyside Diner to find Jake and Tommy holding court at the counter, regaling Jerry with elaborate stories about their new bedrooms and the tire swing Alexander had promised to hang in the backyard. "Mommy! Daddy!" both boys shouted, launching themselves off their stools. Maya's heart still skipped a beat every time they called Alexander Daddy without hesitation or confusion. It had taken weeks for the word to feel natural, but now it rolled off there. "Tongues like it had always been true. Did you bring all your important stuff?" Jake asked Alexander seriously. "The most important stuff," Alexander confirmed, ruffling Jake's hair. "What about your robot computers?" "Those belong to the company, but I kept the picture of you and Tommy that I kept on my desk." "Good." Tommy nodded approvingly. "Pictures are more important than computers." Danny appeared from the kitchen, wearing her signature purple apron and a grin that could power the city. "Well, look who's slumming it with us regular folks," she teased Alexander. "Be nice," Maya warned, but she was smiling. "I am being nice. I could have mentioned the time he tried to tip me $50 for a cup of coffee." "That was one time," Alexander protested. "And it was very sweet," Maya added, though she'd also explained to Alexander that over-tipping made people uncomfortable rather than grateful. Jerry emerged from the kitchen carrying plates loaded with their favorites: meatloaf for Alexander, club sandwich for Maya, and grilled cheese with extra pickles for the boys. "On the house," Jerry announced. "Consider it a housewarming gift." "Jerry, you don't have to—" Maya started. "My diner, my rules," Jerry said firmly. "Besides, I'm going to miss having you around. Who's going to keep Danny from putting glitter in the salt shakers?" "That was an accident," Danny protested. "Mostly," as they settled into their favorite booth, the one by the window where the boys could watch cars go by. Maya felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not the dramatic, overwhelming joy of movie moments, but the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where you belong with exactly the right people. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing over the promise ring he'd given her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Just this. All of this." Maya gestured around the diner, where Danny was dramatically telling a story to another customer, where Jerry was humming while he cooked, where Jake and Tommy were building elaborate structures with French fries. A year ago, if someone had told me this was how my life would look, I never would have believed them. Good, different, or scary? Good difference, really, really good. Tommy looked up from his French fry architecture. "Daddy, when we move to the new house, can we have pancakes for dinner sometimes?" "Why pancakes for dinner?" Alexander asked. "Because it's silly and silly fun things are the best things." Alexander met Maya's eyes across the table, and she saw her own thoughts reflected back at her. "Out of the mouths of babes." "Yes," Alexander said solemnly. "We can definitely have pancakes for dinner sometimes." "And ice cream for breakfast?" Jake asked hopefully. "Don't push it," Maya laughed. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their new home, Maya watched Alexander help the boys into their car seats with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years instead of months. He checked the straps twice, made sure they had their favorite stuffed animals, and listened patiently as they argued over which songs to play during the drive. 6 months ago, Alexander Sterling had been one of the most powerful men in the city, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Now he was arguing with 2 4-year-olds about whether dinosaur songs were better than superhero songs, and he looked happier than Maya had ever seen him. As they pulled out of the diner parking lot, heading toward their new life in a house. With a tire swing and bedrooms painted in colors the boys had chosen themselves, Maya realized something profound. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most beautiful transformations. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you really need. Sometimes the word daddy slipped out at exactly the right moment to change 3 lives forever. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, love really is enough to build something beautiful from the bro. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.